In this lesson, we're talking all about hormones. So our hormone system is made up of organs and glands that produce, secrete, and cycle these chemical messengers. And so they have the ability to send communication to cells and trigger many different events in our body. They are responsible for body functions such as growth and development, reproduction, metabolism, energy, even muscle contractions, digestion, breathing, and the blood levels of certain nutrients in our body. And when hormones are not being produced or balanced properly, they have significant effect on our health. So it can lead to a lot of different symptoms and even different diseases and that kind of thing. So we're going to talk about cortisol, and cortisol is known as our stress hormone, and it is released when our body perceives any kind of stress. So this is past the obvious stress of what usually we consider the emotional stress of our lives, but this also includes things like really deep-rooted things, imbalanced blood sugar levels, lack of sleep, changes in routine, injury or pain, food allergies, poor gut health, intense exercise, environmental toxins, even traveling. All of these are different levels and different kinds of stress on our body. Even if we're not necessarily feeling it emotionally, any kind of change in our body is considered a stress. And so cortisol is necessary to our body for protection and safety. That's why we innately needed it to protect us and keep our body safe and trigger different hormones so that our body deeper down could be really protected. But it has turned to be in overdrive with modern day living. So we're more stressed emotionally, we're around more environmental toxins, there's more pesticides and things on our food, different changes of routine, we're maybe not sleeping as well. And so with our modern day living, there's definitely an increase in cortisol levels, and that can be really detrimental to our other hormones, like our sex hormones, like estrogen and progesterone. So we're going to talk more about that. So in terms of our sex hormones, these are things like estrogen. Estrogen is really what gives women our women traits. So estrogen is what is going to start rising when puberty happens. So it's going to include the development and growth of our body. And it's also what regulates our cycle. So this is what's going to trigger us having our first period. It's going to regulate our cycle throughout our entire life and even our fertility. So it's going to be part of the hormone system that triggers ovulation and that side of things. And so estrogen is the dominant hormone. So just meaning it's the hormone that's the highest in the follicular phase, which is the first half of our entire cycle. We're gonna go over this more, but just for right now, all you need to know is that estrogen is the dominant hormone in the first half of your cycle. And then in terms of progesterone, so this hormone does a lot of different things, but it really determines pregnancy or menstruation. Again, we're gonna go over this in a couple minutes here, but just to also know that progesterone is the dominant one in our luteal phase, or the second half of our cycle. So first it'll be estrogen, and then it'll be progesterone. So this is a little visual of how estrogen and progesterone balance each other. They really counterbalance each other and work in connection with each other in a really cool way. And so this is why it's so important for them to be balanced. because when they are balanced, we don't experience really any symptoms and our body functions exactly how it should be. But when one of them is higher or lower than the other and they're not sharing space, this is when we can see different symptoms pop up. And so just for an example, like I had went over, estrogen on the left side there is dominant in the first half of the cycle, while progesterone is dominant in the second half of the cycle. Estrogen is known to build up the uterine lining, so your like womb lining for embryo or egg implantation, so essentially pregnancy. Progesterone its role is to maintain that lining. And maintain it for pregnancy, or if it drops, then that's what's going to trigger menstruation. While estrogen is known to increase energy and motivation levels, progesterone is more to decrease anxiety and promote relaxation. Estrogen decreases metabolism, body temperature, and appetite, while progesterone increases those things. Low estrogen can link to vaginal dryness, while healthy levels promote a healthy libido for progesterone. And then just the last one too is high levels of estrogen is known to be linked to heavy or painful periods and more PMS, while having healthy levels of progesterone really promotes a healthy period and fertility. So you can see clearly how they kind of counterbalance each other, and each one of them has their role and their space. And so going into different sex hormones, so testosterone, it's definitely found in much lower amounts in women, but it's still actually needed for optimal health. So women still have testosterone in their body, not nearly as much as men, but it's still needed. And then follicle stimulating hormone, or FSH, it is responsible for stimulating estrogen production. And then it's also for egg maturation. So really starting to build up that egg and get it ready for ovulation. Whereas luteinizing hormone, or LH, is responsible for stimulating the ovaries to actually release that egg. So the egg that is now matured from the first part of your cycle, now it's being triggered to release by this hormone. And it also leads to progesterone production too. So in terms of cycle phases and events, so there's 4 main phases of your cycle that we're gonna go over. They all just kind of lead into the next one, but we can give some like day guidelines to give you an example. Everyone's going to be a little bit different, but typically on average, this is how a woman's cycle works. And so first of all, your menstrual phase. So day 1 of your period, this is when this starts. So the first day that you're bleeding is day 1. And obviously this can last anywhere from 3 to 7 days. That's usually like the normal healthy amount of days that you want to be in this like menstrual phase. And in this phase, your hormones are at the absolute lowest levels, and bleeding is occurring, obviously. And so then we can move more into the follicular phase. So usually this is about 7 to 10 days. And in this phase, this is when FSH stimulates the follicle to prepare for ovulation. So it's getting the egg ready before ovulation is going to be triggered. And so this is also when estrogen begins to rise. And so estrogen builds up the uterine lining. So it's going to get all the nutrients and the structures that our uterus needs to build a really, healthy, safe home for that egg to implant there. And so that's what it's going to be doing in the follicular phase. And eventually that rise in estrogen is going to trigger LH. And so that's the one that will actually trigger that egg to release. So ovulation. And then going into the third phase of your cycle is your ovulatory phase. So this is between 3 to 4 days. I'd say more so 3. This is when high estrogen levels, your estrogen is going to be at its very peak, and that is going to trigger LH to peak as well, which is both going to release the egg. So ovulation occurs at this point. And so at this point, the egg actually only stays alive for up to 48 hours max in your entire cycle. Usually it's more so around like that 24 hour, but as like a safe, space, it's more so the 48 hours. And so this also does mean that you can only get pregnant in that 48 hours. You can kind of, there's more into this in terms of like how long sperm can live inside of you, but just knowing that you can't get pregnant when the egg isn't ovulating or after the egg has died off. And so, another important thing too is knowing that ovulation is actually the main event of your cycle. So we're so taught to like track our periods, and our period is happening, and always talking about periods when we're growing up and learning about this stuff a little bit. But the main event of your cycle is actually ovulation. That is your body's number one goal in the entire cycle, is to ovulate and to get pregnant and to reproduce. Menstruation is just what follows it. And so the fourth phase is called the luteal phase, and this can last anywhere between 7 to 14 days. So all of these days in total are going to add up anywhere between like 26 to like maybe 34 at the absolute longest cycle. On average, it's 28. But all of these days have their space in the cycle. And so in the luteal phase, a structure on the egg, so there's the egg and there's a structure around the egg, it's called the corpus luteum. And it actually ruptures to let the egg out, but then that lining kind of disintegrates. And that's actually what helps to produce a lot of the progesterone in your body. And so that is what is going to lead to higher levels of progesterone in that last half of your cycle. And you can start to see why this is so important, and why ovulation is actually so important is because it's really hard to have high enough levels of progesterone if you're not ovulating. And not all of us are ovulating if we don't have healthy cycles or healthy hormones to get us to that point. So this is why ovulation is the main event, is because it's your body's number one goal, but it's also extremely important and actually essential in order to give your body enough of progesterone. So progesterone's produced in smaller amounts in different glands in your body, but this is where the most of it comes from. So the role of progesterone is extremely important, and we're going to go through more of it here. So progesterone is responsible for, again, maintaining the uterine lining. So estrogen was what built it up, and progesterone is what's going to like keep it in place and like maintain it. And so it's important for that lining to be maintained and kept in place, especially if an egg is attached to it, because the egg is what's going to grow there and eventually grow into a baby. And so it's really important for progesterone to keep it there for pregnancy, because when it drops, when progesterone levels drop, that is going to trigger the uterine lining to fall away and start shedding. And that's what triggers menstruation or our period. And so if an egg is fertilized by sperm, it implants on the uterine lining and pregnancy occurs. But the body must maintain progesterone levels in order to successfully continue pregnancy. Otherwise, the uterine lining cannot hold up and shedding occurs. And if you were pregnant, this can result in a potential miscarriage. And so this could be undetected even if it was like within, a few days or a week or two. But that can happen, as we know, even into the first trimester. And so this is why progesterone is so important for fertility and for being able to conceive very successfully. And so if the egg is not fertilized during the ovulatory phase, then progesterone will just start to eventually drop in the luteal phase, and then eventually that will lead to menstruation. So this is how progesterone is really connected to fertility, pregnancy, but then also getting our period too. So, that's kind of a lot to picture in your mind, but this visual really sums it all up. And so you can see at the top, they've only broken it down into two phases. So the follicular phase and the luteal phase, while I went over those four, but same kind of idea. So you can see that labeled at the top. And then just below that, you can see the follicle. So the follicle is starting to grow and starting to mature into an egg. And then in the middle there is when ovulation occurs. And so the egg is coming out. The yellow part around that is the corpus luteum that we're talking about. And so the egg is coming out of that, rupturing from it. But then the corpus luteum is starting to get smaller and smaller in the luteal phase because it's starting to disintegrate. And that's what's starting to increase progesterone levels. And so in the middle here with the different lines, you can see that progesterone, it's that blue line there. So if you follow that, it's pretty low during the follicular phase, but then it peaks in the luteal phase. And that's because of what I just went over there. And then you can also reference the red line. So estrogen, you can see it starts to really peak right before ovulation. And the peak of it is what is going to trigger LH. So LH was the one that is actually going to release the egg. And so you can see the big peak or spike in LH right before ovulation. That's what's going to trigger it. FSH is pretty steady all along there too. And then, just at the bottom too, you can kind of see at the beginning of the cycle in the menstrual phase, that's when the bleeding is occurring. And then as it gets higher and higher, that's just the uterine lining building up and then being maintained. And then it's going to start to drop off again there. So this is a really great visual just to kind of put it all together. Of course, let me know if you have any questions on this, but this is what your cycle looks like throughout every period, every cycle. So it's super cool. And then just a little note on the side there too, we are going to go through a whole module on how to live more in sync with your cycle and your hormones. You can see how they fluctuate. And although that fluctuation is to trigger different events like ovulation and getting your period, other things too, like mood and energy levels are going to start to be affected by that as well. So hormonal imbalances. So these occur when not enough or too much of certain hormones are being produced, or when your body is not detoxing them efficiently. And so this is caused by numerous factors. It could be insufficient nutrition, so not getting enough of the building blocks like nutrients, vitamins, minerals, healthy fats, proteins, things like that. And then the body struggles to maintain or even build and balance those sex hormones. Another one is high stress. So stress promotes cortisol to take over in the body. And when cortisol is really high, the body really struggles to balance sex hormones. Another one is poor detox. So if your elimination pathways aren't supported, aren't working very well, or your liver is kind of sluggish, it's not working its best either, then that can really contribute to having higher levels of hormones in your body that your body needs, and that can throw things off. Poor sleep as well. So this increases cortisol and interferes with hormone function at night. So we know that the liver is the most active at night. And so the liver is connected to hormone health. And if poor sleep is being thrown into it, then that can affect your hormones too. And then the last one too is endocrine disrupting chemicals. So EDCs. These are chemicals that are found in our environment, in our products, those kinds of things, which we will talk more about in the next lesson. But essentially they trick our hormones they trick our body into thinking that they are its own hormones. And so our body doesn't produce those hormones anymore. And so obviously, if they're not real hormones, they don't do the functions that they're supposed to. And that really throws things off, as well as these EDCs really start to overburden our liver. So our liver is known to detox a lot of chemicals and toxins and just things that our body doesn't need. And so if we're adding more of them to our body and we're exposing ourselves to more, then it's giving our liver and our body an even larger job to get rid of those. Okay, so we are going to move into the top 10 essentials for healthy hormones. So number 1 is having balanced blood sugar levels and reduced sugar. So this is one of the first root concepts that we went over in this program, and you're already starting to get a good handle on knowing when to incorporate protein and healthy fats and switching your carb sources, maybe lowering your sugar consumption. So you are already doing this. Number 2 is optimal elimination. So we went over this in the past of increasing your fiber levels and your consumption, as well as your water consumption too. So you've already got that on track as well. Number 3 is consuming enough carbs. So this is really important to give your body enough energy to actually be able to produce these hormones and then balance them as well. So this is really important. We know how to swap to more whole and complex natural sources of carbs. And so you're doing this as well. Number 4 is healthy gut. And so all of those things leading up are going to really help to support your gut health. But we also talked about some foods that you can start to incorporate in your nutrition that are really supportive for gut health. So you're on track with that as well. And number 5 is reduced stress and positive mindset. So doing things like the affirmations, meditation, the healing visualization, all of that is going to help you create a healthier mindset and shift into more of that positive, healing, balancing energy in your body. And then number 6 is quality sleep. So we went over some quality sleep tips that you can start to incorporate. That's going to be really, really important for balanced hormones. And then next lesson, we're going to talk about reducing environmental toxins. So really reducing the amount of chemicals and EDCs that you're exposed to so that that's not affecting your hormone levels. So you'll be taken care of with that. And then in the future, we're going to talk about these next 3 points. So things like energy protection and balance, supporting detoxification in your body so that excess hormones can be removed from your body, and your body, your liver, things like that can start to work really, really well. And then lastly, it'll be living more in alignment and more in sync with your cycle and with yourself. And so all of this is going to tie together to allow you to have healthier hormones and more balanced hormones. And so these, in my opinion, are the top 10 factors that give you the healthiest hormones, and you are on your track to getting there too. And so, as a little extra resource, you're welcome to read my hormone health ebook that is linked in the extra resources module. It goes a little bit more into depth or detail of the things that we went over here. But let me know if you have any questions. I'm really excited that you know more about your hormones and your cycle now.